Well, let's continue the conversation now with CNN political analyst and national political reporter for Real Clear Politics, Rebecca Berg, and professor of politics and journalism at Morgan State University, Jason Johnson. Good morning to both of you.
Morning, Victor.
So, Jason, let me start with you. I mean, this was sold, at least the repeal, maybe not the replacement, was sold as a gimme after the election. You had Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, and now you had a Republican president. I want you to watch the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, on the day after the election. Watch.
And so to your specific question about repealing and replacing Obamacare, this Congress, this House majority, this Senate majority has already demonstrated and proven we're able to pass that legislation and put it on the president's desk. Problem is, President Obama vetoed it. Now we have President Trump coming, who is asking us to do this. So with unified Republican government, we can fix this.
More than 60 times they voted to either undermine or defund Obamacare, and now they can't get through a single vote to get it to the Senate. Put into context what this means for the Republicans.
I mean, this is a choke job so bad that the Falcons are making fun of them, right?
Okay.
Like
Too soon for Falcons jokes.
I'm just saying, I had to throw it out there, Victor. Literally, you have like a 30-member majority in the House. You control the Senate. You control the presidency. You're soon going to control the judiciary. There is absolutely no excuse for the Republicans not passing this for any other reason than their own incompetence and hubris. And there's two big consequences to this, Victor. Number one, who's going to listen to Paul Ryan now? No member of Congress right now who has a seat up in 2018, especially a seat that's competitive, is going to put their neck on the line for a guy who can't get this policy done. And it also shows that President Trump's threats don't matter. He threatened everybody. Hey, if you're not going to vote for this, I'm going to come after you. Well, obviously, his threats are now empty. So this is a really weakened party, and this is a huge embarrassment and just a pathetic example of governance.
Rebecca, huge embarrassment. And thus far, we know that the president has not taken any responsibility, and they're heaping praise on one another. The president loves Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan loves the president. At some point, as we approach 2018 and they have to go back to these districts to get votes, Republicans in Congress are going to have to blame someone. Does that change sooner than getting close to the midterms?
Well, I mean, the blame game is already sort of unfolding behind the scenes, at least. We're seeing reports from unnamed advisors on Capitol Hill and in the White House blaming each other for this unraveling. But as Paul Ryan said at his press conference yesterday, what this comes down to is that Republicans as a whole need to learn how to govern. And this includes the president, who said yesterday in his remarks that he learned a lot from this process. Remember, this is someone, President Trump, who has never worked in Washington, has never had to try to pass a major piece of legislation or even a minor piece of legislation. And there's a learning curve there. It's not easy to govern. Getting elected is one thing, one skill set. Governing is quite another. And so Republicans on Capitol Hill, who have been either in a majority with a Democratic president or in the minority, and a president with no governing experience, they're all going to need to learn how to get legislation passed. And clearly they are not there yet, as Paul Ryan said yesterday.
Jason, I saw you shaking your head there in the monitor.
Yeah, no, that's not an excuse. Look, when you get called, you get off the bench, you do your job. And even Paul Ryan said, look, they sent legislation to President Obama that got vetoed. This has nothing to do with learning how to govern. This has to do with learning how to be a responsible legislator. See, it proves that all those different times, Republicans had 7 years to improve the very clear problems with Obamacare. There are clear problems that everybody understands, but it proves that all those times they were voting against it, in the bill that they handed to the president, they never expected those things to work. They never expected to face the real consequences of their legislation. And now that the light of day is on them and everyone's going to hold them accountable, they choked because they don't want to govern. They just want to be in opposition. And that's the disappointing part, because there are things about Obamacare that should be fixed, and it's not going to happen.
Rebecca, what role does the president's, let's say, unorthodox approach to Republican orthodoxy? Let me explain what that means. He may not necessarily stand 100% with the conservatives, with the moderates. He wants a W. So when you go to the president, you offer these amendments, these changes. He could lose half the team just to get the W. We've talked a lot about how the president has to learn to work with a diverse GOP House. They've got to learn to work with this president as well.
That's right. And, you mentioned that Donald Trump is not a traditional Republican, and that's absolutely true. And so there were some people on this who were thinking, well, why didn't he reach across the aisle to work with Democrats? And it's really just the political climate that's going to make that very difficult for Donald Trump. And it will be interesting to see on future initiatives. So when you start looking at tax reform, when you start looking at potential infrastructure projects that he has been pushing, will he be able to just push the Freedom Caucus to the side, say, I don't need to work with you, I don't need your votes, I'm not going to go to the right on this bill? Can he then work across the aisle with Democrats and say, this is for the good of the country? Chuck Schumer yesterday was saying, if they take repeal off the table, we'll work with them on health care. But that's a non-starter for a lot of Republicans. So on these future issues, will Donald Trump be able to say, I want to make this a bipartisan effort? That's a big question.
Jason, I want you to listen to something the president said just a few days ago in Louisville, Kentucky, trying to sell this health care plan.
This is our long-awaited chance to finally get rid of Obamacare. We can get this bill passed in some form so that we can pass massive tax reform, which we can't do until this happens. So we got to get this done before we can do the other. In other words, we have to know what this is before we can do the big tax cuts.
Okay, well, so this, meaning the health care bill, is nothing because they didn't pass it. What does this mean now for tax reform?
It means tax reform is going to be even more difficult, Victor, because, look, the Republicans may get away with just cutting taxes, which is fine, but tax reform, where you have to really go through the arcane laws and figure out, well, what entitlements are we going to change and what deductibles we're going to change, I don't think they're going to be able to do that. You have to look at this. If you step back from this for a second, this is 3 L's, right? 3 L's from Trump. He was wrong about the Muslim ban. He keeps losing on that. He was wrong about the wiretapping, and now he's wrong about the Affordable Care Act. And these are all things that he said he was going to do, and he's only been in office for 60-something days. So again, if you're a member of Congress, the most dangerous thing that can happen for a president is when members of Congress start thinking that their fate and the president's fate are separate. And going into tax reform, these guys are going to be thinking about their own districts. They're not going to be thinking about President Trump's legacy.
And we're already starting to see those divisions laid bare, especially on border adjustment, which is going to be a major feature Republicans think of their tax reform on the House side. You have Republicans already saying in the Senate and in the House, that's a non-starter for us. We don't want border adjustment. And so if you have Republicans already in a disagreement on those major features of potential tax reform, this is going to be pretty messy, I would say.
All right, we'll see how this impacts the rest of the agenda. Rebecca, Jason, thank you.
Thanks, Victor.
Guys. Well, President Trump has touted his skill as a bargainer to get things done, even wrote the book on it. But some say there was no art in this deal.
Plus, the president puts the blame for health care failure at the feet of the Democrats.